Coyote Valley is a miracle. This ancient landscape is ecologically essential. With lush wetlands and fertile farmland, Coyote Valley is a provider. For wildlife who make long journeys stretching multiple mountain ranges, it provides safe crossing. For indigenous families who have tended this land for generations, going back thousands of years, it is home. And Coyote Valley happens to be in one of the most populous urban areas in the United States. Tucked just behind the urban sprawl of what is now known as Silicon Valley, Coyote Valley lies beneath the Diablo and Santa Cruz mountain ranges. The sweeping orchards and unbelievably rich soil still reminisce on the area's endearing nickname that has mostly faded into the past, the Valley of Heart's Delight. Today's episode shares a small piece of Coyote Valley's story and the most recent turn in the road. While this is a tiny portion of an epic story, it is one that speaks of how the tide of history really can change when people come together. We are joined today by two visionary leaders at the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority. Andrea McKenzie is the general manager of the Open Space Authority. She has devoted her career to carrying the torch for long-lasting protections in spaces like Coyote Valley and many other beloved natural areas. Nick Perry is leading the charge in developing a master plan for Coyote Valley. As an activist and conservationist, Nick is passionate about Coyote Valley and an architect for the long-term protection of the area as a biological corridor for wildlife, a natural wetland, fertile ground for farming, and beautiful open space for human beings to reconnect with the natural world. Today, you are going to hear the story of Coyote Valley as told by two of its fiercest advocates, Andrea and Nick. You are going to hear about their stories as individuals and people who love the earth. You are going to hear about what it takes to protect land on a massive scale. You will hear words like land acquisition, parcels, city government, zoning, and development. What I hope you hear underneath is what it takes to bring people together to make change on a large scale. This is how the tide of history on this planet changes, turning land over to conservation, restoration, and the health of all beings on this planet. This is a story not just about Coyote Valley, but about all the wild lands in the world that are within and adjacent to urban areas. If we take care of these oft overlooked places, we start to build urban spaces that are healthier and more resilient for all. My name is Will Rand, and this is the Earth Story Podcast. Andrea and Nick, thank you for being here. Thank you for fighting for our future. Always what we ask in these conversations, first off, is about your own relationship with the earth. If there was a moment in your life where you remembered that awareness or awakening of that you had a relationship with the earth, or that your life was going to become a part or about relating with the earth, would you be willing to share some of that with us today?
Well, that's a great question. It's hard to remember exactly like a first memory of being connected to the earth. I think I grew up in the Bay Area and have been surrounded by the beauty of nature my entire life, which is a really fantastic thing. I'm really privileged to be able to have that growing up experience. But memories that come back to me are just like, exploring in my own yard, picking up stones and finding salamanders underneath right in the middle of Mountain View, and being like, wow, there's animals in my yard. How cool. Or driving on 280, going I don't know where, and seeing deer and being like, oh, we live in the middle of this metropolitan area, but there's still these wild creatures that are all around us. And just being really fascinated by that. And my dad picked up on that and would take me on hikes, and we would just go hiking together. And as I grew older, I became more and more fascinated by how places change over time and the dramatic story of Santa Clara Valley's transformation from the Valley of Heart's Delight to Silicon Valley. Growing up in that 90s, the dot-com boom, there was like the last remnants of the agricultural era were kind of slipping away from the northern parts of the county. And that was really fascinating to me, especially because my family's been in the valley for a long time. And my grandpa, his family actually came to Santa Clara Valley as migrant farm workers during the Great Depression. And then from New Mexico, and then he brought my grandma here as a newlywed from New Mexico as well. And they would describe taking the Greyhound bus from the Southwest and then coming to the Santa Clara Valley. And there's this beautiful landscape of rolling hills and pastoral farmland and blossoming orchards. And to them, it was like they had been in the Garden of Eden. They're here. They've reached paradise, and how beautiful it was. And they had this very bittersweet um, relationship to the place because it had changed so much. And they would, take time to point out or take me to places that reminded them of what it used to look like. And one of those places was Coyote Valley. So, from a really young age, learning to appreciate, what this place is, what it was, how it's changed, how it can continue to change. It just has always been a part of my life story.
It's beautiful. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. What about you, Andrea?
Well, a lot of what Nick is saying really resonates with me. Really, since I was a small child, I've had a really strong affinity for nature and wildlife. And as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a protector of nature and all of her amazing creatures and inspire people to protect the natural world. Um, I don't know, Nick probably didn't watch this show, but I grew up watching Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom and National Geographic shows. They were on, the equivalent of the Disney Channel, on Sunday night. And that really made an impression on me. And I also grew up at a time that I was lucky enough to go out and free play in nature with my brothers and our friends from the neighborhood. We would go into what we called the woods of upstate New York. And even when we moved to LA when I was 10 years old, the big city of Los Angeles, we grew up there in my teens, kind of in the shadow of the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, which, as we all know today, is one of the largest urban national parks in the United States. We traveled a lot to national parks, the Yellowstones, the Grand Tetons, the big sequoias of Sequoia National Park. All those things made an impression on me, and I really worshiped the people that were nature protectors and wanted to be like them when I grew up. And so I kind of grew up believing that having a career in public service, working on behalf of the environment, was a noble cause. And kind of like Nick, I got very curious when I was going to college and doing environmental studies and urban planning. I was really curious about this interface, this where nature meets city, and just how important wild places are to the quality of life of our urban areas. And so I think I bring a lot of that to the work that I've done here in the San Francisco Bay Area on protecting open space.
Yeah, I love that theme of being a protector, and that's really how you have been able to show up in the world for so many decades, which is fantastic. And Nick, you've already talked about Coyote Valley and how it holds these vestiges of memory of the Valley of Heart's Delight, a valley that really was bridging urban and wild space in some ways. And that is what's brought us all together today, is the story of Coyote Valley. And so I would love to hear from both of you if we could piece together a glimpse of what is Coyote Valley, who is Coyote Valley, what's the story. Yeah, just share with us a little bit about this amazing place.
I like to say that someday the complete story of Coyote Valley will be written, and it would be a very compelling story, especially when you think about what might have been. And so I was starting to think about Coyote Valley in our talk today, and I was thinking that if you were driving south from the San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge down Highway 101 or Highway 85 through what is now Silicon Valley, you would be driving through an area where Silicon Valley supplanted the Santa Clara Valley and what was once known as the Valley of the Heart's Delight, one of the most productive agricultural areas in the United States until the 1960s. And today, when you take that journey, you will travel through a nonstop sea of development along the transportation corridors till you get to the Coyote Valley between San Jose and Morgan Hill. And here you experience a relic of the past, quite extensive areas of natural and agricultural lands that are still there, still in production, kind of a green belt of sorts. And what you're seeing is one of the last remaining undeveloped valley floors in the San Francisco Bay Area. You're seeing a place where crops of all kinds are still grown. You're seeing a last remaining large freshwater wetland complex called the Laguna Seca. And you're seeing two mountain ranges coming very close together, the Santa Cruz Mountains and the Diablo Range, where wildlife are trying to move between 1 million acres of habitat in those two mountain ranges. But for the better part of 40 years, this landscape has been, and this valley floor has been threatened with all kinds of development, campus industrial, housing tracts, warehouses, data centers, and today energy facilities. And there have been amazing individuals who've opposed these efforts to develop this last chance landscape, as we call it. And our very own Nick Perry, and he'll tell the story, I'm sure, is one of those activists. But we haven't been entirely successful in stopping those threats. And so the northernmost part of Coyote Valley is within the incorporated city of San Jose. And over 40 years, developers, one after another, have proposed new towns, all kinds of development here that have been entertained by the City Council of San Jose. And as Nick touched on earlier, it wasn't until the dot-com bust and the Great Recession kind of burst that economic bubble, and there began to be an opening where Coyote Valley could be seen for its inherent value and the importance of protecting it. That doesn't mean today you still don't have landowners and speculators that are still hoping that the economic paradigm will change and they'll be able to develop this area. But if you flash forward to 2014 to say 2019, the last 5, 6 years, the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority teamed up with a very important land trust partner, the Peninsula Open Space Trust, to start acquiring key parcels for conservation as speculators may be tired of holding on to this land, hoping that they'd get a chance to develop. And so in 2019, together we purchased the first almost 1,000 acres of North Coyote Valley for conservation, significant money coming from the city of San Jose, which kind of viewed this landscape as important for natural infrastructure and water. They put quite a bit of money in there. And as these lands started to be acquired, the dominoes started to fall, and conservationists were now on a relentless campaign to conserve over 1,500 acres of valley floor for conservation. And you were starting to see the paradigm shift from a intensive industrial landscape of all kinds of development to a conservation and a restoration landscape. And I think I'll just close by saying the lesson there is to never give up. And you know that conservationists like to say the wins are temporary and the losses are permanent. And so it's just a constant effort to see that conservation vision come to fruition.
Nick, would you share from your perspective, and Andrea already alluded to the activism that you were a part of, love to hear more about that, and how did you first encounter your work with Coyote Valley and how you've understood the story to unfold over time?
Yeah, looking a little bit further back on the history that Andrea shared, it's really been Coyote Valley story has really been a roller coaster since the 1960s. So San Jose annexed it in 1960 and zoned it for development. And then the council perspective shifted in the 70s and they zoned it back to open space and agriculture. And then in the 80s, they zoned it back to development. And so by the time I came on the scene in the late 90s, it had been land banked basically. San Jose had said, "Hey, we don't want to develop this yet until it's the right development for us." And that for them that meant jobs. They wanted Coyote Valley to be a job center to serve as a counterpoint to North Santa Clara County, where all the jobs have been built. San Jose wanted the jobs that like are in Palo Alto or Mountain View or Sunnyvale and Santa Clara. Coyote Valley was like where they were going to have Apple. Was looking at doing its headquarters there. Lots of companies. And when I first was kind of exploring Coyote Valley in the late 90s, it was Cisco. Cisco was going to build their headquarters in Coyote Valley. And so the city was at that time debating, okay, do we open up the floodgates? And if they started to build the jobs, then that would have triggered developing tract housing in Mid Coyote Valley. And so it was just going to be this very typical kind of suburban sprawl pattern of like 4 to 5 story office buildings with parking lots, and then separate from that, further south, housing, and then the green belt was going to be the area of South Coyote Valley, which separates Morgan Hill, which is actually the most built up area. So the green belt was going to be what is now the most built up area, ironically. And so I heard about that reading the Mercury News, and like I mentioned earlier, it was this place that I had been exploring with my family to see a glimpse of what all of Santa Clara Valley used to look like. And I just thought, like, this is stupid. There has to be a better way. Who's in charge of making these decisions? Like, why aren't we building these new jobs in downtown San Jose? Or, some of those empty parking lots are those, those fields that have been skipped over elsewhere to the north. Like, why are we going into the green field? And you know, I learned about city planning by kind of reading all the articles about Coyote Valley just as a, teenager, being like, how does this all happen? Who's in charge here? I even read when the EIR came out, I started reading that, and I think somewhere in the back of the appendices, there's a letter from me saying, hey, why don't you build in downtown and let this area still be open space? And back then, my family had internet, dial-up internet through America Online, AOL, and every AOL account got a certain amount of web space for free. And so all I did was open up Microsoft Word basically and Microsoft Paint and create this little website that was called Save Coyote Valley, and put it up on my family's web space. And back then, anyone who could build a website, people were, especially, folks of older generations were like, whoa, how'd you do that? And it wasn't very complicated. I was not a tech whiz by any means, but put pictures together, got one of like the first digital cameras you could buy that actually you inserted the floppy disk into it to take pictures. Went out to Coyote Valley, took pictures or actually scanned pictures too sometimes, and just tried to tell the story and like put a different narrative out there. And because I was a teenager and because it was probably the first website about Coyote Valley that wasn't, well, it was probably the first website about Coyote Valley, um, people paid attention, which was cool. I was like, oh, I have a voice here. Like I can make a difference here. And back then, as Andrea mentioned, it felt like the battle had already been lost in a lot of ways. We weren't the kind of kind of joined efforts with the Greenbelt Alliance. They asked me to speak at a press conference when I was at 16 out in Coyote Valley. Was interviewed by various people. Was like the San Jose Metro newspaper. They had the article called Coyote Land, where they presented Coyote Valley as if it were a theme park, and all the different characters in a theme park, like the developers, were like one thing, and I can't remember all the details, but I was like depicted as like the scaredy scarecrow or something, because I'm afraid of change. And so I wasn't afraid of change. I just wanted, the right type of change. Um, but anyway, we thought it was going to get developed, and what we were advocating for back then wasn't to protect it as open space, which was what I wanted. It was to make sure that if it was developed, it wouldn't be sprawl. And so that's like where the goalposts were at that time. And so like if you're going to take this beautiful, precious land, at least develop it in a way that, is compact and protects the most sensitive areas, and doesn't just, repeat the horrible development patterns that have happened in the past. And so I went away to college, and then actually there were new plans that came in after Cisco's proposal to develop more of like a new urbanist, mixed use city in Coyote Valley. And then, as Andrea mentioned, the Great Recession happened, and everyone paused, and everyone was like, huh, what should we do with this land? And people started to realize all the really important benefits that it provides. It's not just a field waiting for development. It has all these really unique qualities that we can spend more time talking about, that the advocacy community was really able to amplify the message and not just talk about preserving it because it's beautiful, but preserving it because of the natural infrastructure it provides and its really critical importance for the health of our region. And I think that's when the narrative really shifted.
So bridge the gap a little bit for me. When the economic bubble kind of bursts, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, this isn't going to become the next big city in the Santa Clara Valley or in the Bay Area generally. What was it all the way until 2019 that there were like a development in process, a sense of we want to have uh, kind of open space land here, but did it take that whole span of time for the first parcel of land to be bought, the first open space authorities there, or when did that really start to happen, and what really shifted that? What made the turn where the city government was like, actually, yes, we should do this instead?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'd love to actually see it all mapped out on a timeline, kind of, Will. But it was all the way up until around 2008 that developers started to walk away from the plans and the environmental documents that had been approved. Developers like to say that, over $20 million of investment had been made in this landscape. And you see it as you enter the Coyote Valley. There's like a grand entrance with big, beautiful light posts and wide roads and all that. So it sat there for a little bit in the ownership of speculative developers who weren't quite sure what to do with this. And actually, in 2016, the land went up for auction. And the conservationists actually put in an offer and tried to buy it, but were beat out by two local housing developers. But nobody really knew what they had planned to do with it. In the meantime, around 2014, the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority did two things. It put out this comprehensive vision for protecting these multi-benefit landscapes in the county, including Coyote Valley at the top of the list. And it passed, with the help of the voters, an open space funding measure, again, with Coyote Valley at the top of the list. So now conservationists were prepared to fully engage to try and protect this landscape during this lull in the economy, and they had the resources to do so. And so the Open Space Authority and the Peninsula Open Space Trust, with the help of then Mayor Sam Liccardo, started negotiating with the developers who had purchased in the auction these lands. And those negotiations, which were very spirited, went on for a good year and a half or so. But what really was the game changer is when the city of San Jose put this natural infrastructure and hard infrastructure measure on the ballot, a $650 million infrastructure bond for filling potholes and for police and fire stations. The mayor said, let's have 50 million of that go to natural infrastructure, because we can see after the floods of 2017 along the Coyote Creek corridor, which caused over $100 million of damage and evacuated 14,000 people, many of them low income. Coyote Valley is serving a purpose to slow floodwaters, to retain flood water upstream in the upper watershed, and that's important to the city of San Jose. When that happened and those monies were approved, it was a total game changer. Now, the two biggest landowners in North Coyote Valley were open to selling, and those acquisitions happened fairly rapidly after that. And then what followed was another big domino, which the city of San Jose changed the zoning of this landscape, at least their own lands, from commercial industrial to agriculture and open space. And they moved all the jobs that Nick had been talking about, this future job center, moved them to infill areas. Then it's just like the vision and the paradigm change took off. And now you had a new class of investors, conservation investors, from the state level to the regional level, private foundations, and of course the Open Space Authority and Peninsula Open Space Trust. And that has brought us to where we are today. And so, Nick talked earlier about the kind of ping pong nature of how city viewed Coyote Valley. And it wasn't until these first purchases happened that that ping pong nature really slowed down. It hasn't completely stopped, but I would say by and large, Coyote Valley is largely now in a conservation status instead of a speculative development status.
I just want to name how big that feels. I mean, and how excruciating that must have been, especially between 2010, 2014 to 2019, that process of waiting in the negotiations, and the like slowly dawning awareness on city officials and people who are urban planners to finally realize, like, you have to have natural wild spaces, as alongside major urban centers. You can't just grow and grow and grow and grow and grow and not have issues like flooding and what's going to happen with food. And, like, there's all these things that are so vital to basic living needs on this earth, let alone like the health and well-being, on a holistic view, that come from living close to nature and in close to wild spaces. But like vital, like basic things, like we don't want these huge floods. We don't want to have, we need space that naturally, it's like that's slowly been a dawning awareness in the last 20 years in different places, but this is a classic kind of example of that. And so when you say that they've kind of shifted to this view of like, okay, we're going to zone this differently, it's going to be a conservation landscape, but also kind of a place for open space. Could you kind of define for people who might not know what that means, what is open space, and what are all the things that can happen in an open space area?
Well, in Coyote Valley, especially, there's a lot of different things can happen in an open space area. And, our mission is to connect people to nature, it's to protect natural lands. It's also to protect agriculture. And that's like, unlike some open space agencies where the focus might just be on the natural side of things, ours is also includes agriculture. So in Coyote Valley, you have a valley floor habitat or a valley floor landscape, like Andrea mentioned, which is actually pretty special and rare and unique to have undeveloped, and have protected as open space. So in Coyote Valley, we have the challenge, the wonderful challenge of being able to figure out what's the right balance between restored habitat, areas where people can connect with and enjoy nature, and areas that can be farmed and where agriculture and that part of Santa Clara Valley's living heritage can continue and prosper and thrive. And so when you talk about open space in Coyote Valley, it's all three of those things, and the really kind of interesting things where they have crossovers between each other too. So yeah, it's not just empty land, and it's not just a place to go hike. It's something more than that in Coyote Valley, which is a really fascinating aspect of the work we're doing right now.
So I'll just follow that up with, you talked about this plan. Oh, Andrea, you talked about this plan in 2014 that was drawn up, a vision for Coyote Valley, a plan. Can you talk about what the vision is for Coyote Valley, what's kind of happened, and what you want to, what's kind of growing, what's emerging right now, and what does it look like as you're on the ground right now?
Andrea was talking about earlier kind of visionary documents that kind of set the groundwork. So one of those was the Santa Clara Valley Green Print, which identified Coyote Valley as a really important place for conservation for all the different benefits that we've been talking about. And then 2017, the Open Space Authority and its partners released the Coyote Valley Landscape Linkage, which is another guiding vision document that talks about this critical importance of Coyote Valley as a place where the mountain ranges, the Diablo Range and the Santa Cruz Mountains come together, and what that means for the ecological health of the entire Bay Area, especially the Santa Cruz Mountains. It's one of the only places left where we can have kind of cross-pollination between species like mountain lion that need to disperse for their health and genetic diversity, and other animals too, everything from like amphibians, like, salamanders to badgers. It really plays an important role for that landscape linkage that connects over 1 million acres on either mountain range. So those are kind of these guiding documents that are in the background. And what's happening now is we're working on a master plan for the protected lands that have been protected since 2017. So a few small parcels were protected by Post in 2017, and then the landmark acquisition that Andrea talked about in 2019 in partnership with Post and the city of San Jose, where almost 1,000 acres of North Coyote Valley were protected. And then since then, an additional 500 acres in Mid Coyote Valley approximately have been protected. So that 1,500 acres is one of the key focus areas of the Open Space Authority's work right now. And I was brought on board in 2020 at that time to manage the planning process for just the North Coyote Valley conservation area. But we were so successful in a partnership with Post of acquiring properties in Mid Coyote Valley that now it's turned into this Coyote Valley Conservation Areas, awkward plural, master plan because it covers both North and Mid Coyote Valley. So for the past few years, there's been a lot of background work. It's one thing to protect the land, it's a whole another thing to understand it, and to actually get the scientists and researchers and planners and engineers out on the lands and figure out, okay, what's going on here? Because there's some really interesting things going on these properties. They've been kind of neglected for a long time because once the original farming families left and sold to speculators, there wasn't much investment in the infrastructure, and a lot of them just went fallow or were converted to just hay fields. So the habitat's kind of degraded, and it's not, the soil has also got some work that we need to do. But also the really complicating factor is the plumbing, basically. So 19 teens. Well, let's go back further than that. Laguna Seca, one of the places in the beautiful compositions that have been created. Laguna Seca was an 1,000-acre wetland historically, and in the 19 teens, they built ditches, they dug out channels, they basically created a brand new creek, which we now call Fisher Creek, to drain all of that wetland and have it flow to Coyote Creek and then down to the bay. And so the landscape has been modified with ditches and drains and all these different things from the 19 teens to drain the historic wetland. Fast forward to the 1990s and early 2000s, in anticipation of all the development that was going to be built, the developers in the city started to layer in additional flood control infrastructure. They built a dam in the middle of Laguna Seca, which was meant to retain most of the water that would have run off the development and turned the northern portion of Laguna Seca into a flood control retention basin. So we have these two eras of plumbing that now, and there's other things that farmers did that, that's not in recorded plans, like they built a ditch or they, did this and did that, and there's things that we don't even know are out there until we start digging around. And we have to figure out, what do we do to basically deplumb this landscape to achieve our conservation goals? And so we've built a hydrological computer model of the entire system. And right now we're playing with it and we're figuring out, okay, if you move the dirt here, what happens there? Uh-oh, we flood the road, or if you plug the hole here, where does the wetland form? And so that has taken some time, but it's a really important investment to make sure that the outcomes that we want to see are happening. So we've got our hydrological team kind of working on that right now. In the meanwhile, we're figuring out what's the right mosaic of habitats that we want to create for both species that we want to live and thrive in Coyote Valley and the ones that we want to pass through. And in combination with that, we're also figuring out how do we get them across or over or under all the roads, so that they don't become roadkill, which is a major problem, especially on roads like Monterey Road. And at the same time with that, we're trying to figure out where should the people go? You know, how do we create regional trail connections? Because like animals crossing between the mountains, Coyote Valley is a wonderful nexus between all the preserves that are in the hills. And so what are the routes that we can create for trails and other experiences, ways for people to interact or help us steward and care for this land, places where they can learn about it? How do we insert those into the landscape in really sensitive, creative, and interesting ways? And then last but not least, where do we want to keep active cultivated farmland? Where are the best places for grazing? What is the infrastructure that farmers need to succeed? What properties should we maintain within our portfolio of properties and keep them as public agricultural lands versus what are properties that maybe we just have a conservation easement and sell back to a farmer? These are all questions and more that are being answered through the master planning process that my team is working on right now. So a lot of the background work is done. Most of it's done. The modeling is in process. The plans are being drawn as we speak. Like literally, like as we speak, we are drawing a range of different ways of answering those questions I laid out. And early in 2026, we'll be going out to the public to share these different approaches and get people's feedback and invite them to share their thoughts and what they like about the different approaches to restoring or enhancing or connecting people to nature in this landscape. And from there, in 2026, as the year moves on, we'll start to narrow down into a preferred vision that we can adopt and be the guiding vision for implementation for years to come.
Sort of sounds like you get to be world building in some ways, or imagining, like playing in imagining space. It sounds like a very just a really creative time too, to kind of look at everything and imagine like what are all the ways that this place can really live its fullest expression of itself. That's what it kind of feels like to me.
Yeah, it's an amazing opportunity. It's really an honor to be able to be working on this project, especially given my connection to Coyote Valley from back in the day when I was a teenager. It is a difficult project. There's lots of different things you need to balance, but it is. I wouldn't want to be doing anything else, and I've got a fantastic team that we're working together on it. It's just it's an amazing experience to be working on this project.
Well, I think Nick would agree. This landscape, this very special landscape, we're learning so much. The landscape is teaching us as we go along, as much as we are trying to understand it. And I like to say, put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Nature is so complex. Uh, Before humans, and mostly European humans, messed with natural landscapes and with nature, and now we affect, virtually every inch of the planet. Nature had a way of self-regulating, and the indigenous communities were amazing stewards of this landscape. San Jose and Coyote Valley is an example of, to some degree, development kind of run amok. A bit of manifest destiny was going on there from the 60s, where you had a city manager who wanted the city of San Jose to be Los Angeles North. And I remember the first time I saw Coyote Valley, I was working for the East Bay Regional Park District in in the East Bay of San Francisco area, and driving down 101 and driving and driving and driving and like, what is this big landscape off to the right? Oh, that's the Coyote Valley, and that's still in San Jose. It was kind of mind-blowing. And, Nick touched on it's still today a beautiful landscape which offers so many benefits to water, to wildlife, to climate resilience, to local food. But what we're trying to do is have, and I think you just touched on it, Will, is just have Coyote Valley reflect it best version of itself. We're not going to create it back to the early 1900s, but a North Star for us is the historical ecology work that was done on this landscape by an organization called the San Francisco Estuary Institute. So we have a good idea how nature functioned in Coyote Valley, and we want to see some of those remnants active again. And we want this landscape to be hospitable to wildlife, and we want it to be a welcoming place for people and local residents. I shudder sometimes to think that decisions were being made by elected officials, city councils, developers for decades with a fraction of the knowledge that we have today about Coyote Valley. It's really only been in the last 8 years, maybe, that we really understand the significance of this landscape, not only to the locale, but to the entire region. Whether it's wildlife movement, this is one of the last places wildlife can move. It overlays the drinking water supply, the aquifer for 1.4 million people. It's all prime soil. It, it can and will in the future be an amazing agricultural landscape for local food and local security. Uh, it houses some of the most sacred sites for indigenous people. I mean, it checks every box that you can imagine. Uh, and so we're humbly recognizing these amazing attributes of this landscape and trying to give it the space, the rewilding, the restoration to be even a fraction of what it used to be, and to involve people in those decisions. But I think when this master plan is completed and we start to see the implementation, I don't think this is hyperbole. I think this is going to be one of the most important landscapes to the public in the entire San Francisco Bay Area. And when people fly into San Jose, I would love that they are coming to visit the Coyote Valley as much as they're going to visit the Apple spaceship campus, and to really see what can happen when nature is given a chance to heal herself again and to show the benefits to people, and that we less and less will take those benefits for granted.
I sort of experienced two things happening here. One is just for local community members who live in the Bay Area, kind of experiencing the master plan as it comes out, and the next couple of years seeing that final visioning happening. What an exciting time to live there and to be a community member and to feel this kind of like miraculous restoration conservation experience happening in your backyard kind of thing. And part of what I hope people are hearing in this conversation is all the labor and struggle that it went into just being able to even think like this, for Coyote Valley, and to be at a place of creating a master plan. And so there's that amazing feeling of what an incredible thing is happening here that both of you are stewarding, and the whole Open Space Authority. But also, it just makes me wonder, like, how many other Coyote Valleys are there just in our country? We have so many large urban areas that, maybe don't have a Silicon Valley, but there is a development complex going on in so many different parts of our country. And what's been lost, I already grieve what we've lost and never known about. But I guess to kind of close today, what I wonder from both of you is from having gone through this experience and going through this experience as you are, what wisdom or words of invitation or advice would you offer to other people in other places that might be wondering similar things about a landscape in their own backyard? How can they kind of get involved in learning more about it, or even What would you invite cities to consider thinking about as they move into the future from what you have learned?
There's no place else in the world like Coyote Valley, but yet every place has their own version of Coyote Valley, right? And I think something that Andrea said at the beginning or earlier about how this is such a story of never giving up, right? And I think that's a message that I would hope your listeners would take. Like, this is the long game. Right now the work we're doing, there's tons of people behind me who have gotten us to this point, and eventually I'll pass on the baton to the next generation to continue to care for and steward this landscape. So don't give up. Keep persevering and keep fighting for the places that you love. I'll say so long for me, driving through Coyote Valley was this really bittersweet experience. Like I was in a sense mourning because I knew that it was going to get developed. It was, we fought, it wasn't gonna, the plans got approved. End of story. I'm gonna go off to college, and when I come back home and visit, well, it's still there for now. And then my family actually ended up moving from Mountain View. Like everyone in my family almost ended up moving to South County because it was more affordable. So I would go through Coyote Valley a lot to visit them and just kind of have this, bittersweet sense, like I almost inherited from my grandparents that, oh, it's gonna be gone. And now when I drive through it, I'm filled with excitement and with hope. And like it's this amazing story that like, wow, we have this wonderful opportunity to like care for and restore this landscape. And I hope folks listen to your podcast, and I hope when the plan's complete, that story will be known far and wide. And when people like Andrea was saying come to visit Santa Clara County, come to visit San Jose or the Bay Area, they come to Coyote Valley and they're filled with hope and excitement for what we can do when we do things right. And that they see, Coyote Valley as a part of the larger story of innovation that exists in Silicon Valley. Like it's not just about, creating the next app. It's about figuring out the way to make a better future for our society. And when we work with nature, we can do that. And when we combine technology with nature, like our hydrological model with the landscape and how we restore it. It's like the best thing that I feel like Silicon Valley, Santa Clara Valley has to offer the world as we move forward and try to address all the challenges that lie in front of us. And I hope Coyote Valley is a place where people can see it in action and be inspired by it.
Coyote Valley is a model. It can be a model for California and for other places in the United States. I think one of the challenges we have with protecting and restoring the natural world is that decision making, which affects these unique, beautiful places, is made based on terms like highest and best use, zoning, uh, real estate. So when you look at the beauty and complexity of the Coyote Valley, what it's been and what it could be in the future, the term real estate is so limiting as a way to describe this place. I mean, it really is an irreplaceable landscape. And I think some of the important work that we're doing today in this special landscape here in the Silicon Valley, yes, we're protecting these lands for future generations, but we're also rewilding them and we're connecting people to them in a way that people will have a sense of place. So, Nick and I both talked about our growing up. To have the privilege of going out and being in nature, being in quiet nature and letting nature influence me, kind of the forest bathing that, we hear about in Japan. Um, to be able to have that experience is priceless. And, when a lot of the decisions were being made about whether Coyote Valley should be zoned back to open space and agriculture rather than for development, many members of the public spoke out to the City Council of San Jose. And the ones that were so impactful and that really made a difference, I think, were the people who said, I grew up in this area. My grandfather farmed here. We worked in to can fruits and vegetables from this landscape. Just driving through Coyote Valley on my way home lowers my pulse and heart rate. Just to be able to see this landscape, that it still exists. And so a lot of the work that the Open Space Authority is doing today is looking at these landscapes. Nature is not only beautiful, but it's essential infrastructure. You don't get to have large, successful economies if you are paving over the natural world, if you're changing your productive soils, if you're redirecting waters elsewhere or overusing water, which we are hearing a lot now with data centers and these kinds of developments. It's kind of like Nick said a little while ago. Sometimes developers and decision makers look at a landscape like this and they see, look at all this wasted space. Just think about all the housing units we could put there, or the warehouses, or whatever. And I think that this landscape is a lesson for how to live intentionally, how to make decisions thoughtfully, with science and spirituality even at its core, to live with less, to have a lower footprint for our development. We're only going to grow in population. We know we need more housing, we need more jobs, we need all this, but we need more energy. But instead of there being trade-offs, how can we have a productive, affordable region with beauty and natural spaces that feed our soul? Can't we have those both? And what better place to make that case than in the Silicon Valley? And I guess I'll just close by saying, as Nick said, other geographies around California and the United States have special landscapes to the people there. And know that you have a voice to speak up for those places, and you have allies that you may not even have met yet. And you have ways of understanding what's inherent on that landscape that is important to the region's economy, ecology, community, that the folks that want to develop those places don't have a clue. So information is power and partnerships are power, and find allies in the decision-making realm who are open to learning how important these landscapes and these special places are. It's really a miracle that Coyote Valley is still here. But I think if Nick is successful in his Coyote Valley Conservation Areas master plan, people will look back decades from now and they'll say, what were they thinking? To think about putting a new town here, or a sea of battery storage facilities or warehouses, which could go anywhere. They're not making land anymore, and they're not making nature anymore. And we've got to come to terms with that kind of limit if we want to have a habitable planet going forward.
The music that has underscored this conversation came out of another conversation that I had with Andrea about a year ago. She told me about these incredible stories of Coyote Valley and asked about the possibility of creating some music to help share this story. It was an absolute joy and pleasure to create this music and record it with violinist Grace Alexander, cellist Erlene Ju, and recording engineer Dario Acosta. When I spent time in Coyote Valley, I was absolutely blown away by the vast array of ecological wonders that are visibly being restored. It is quite an amazing experience to see a landscape transforming in real time into its fullest, most authentic self. What does that look like? It looks like water running the way it wants to, not up against dams or rerouted creeks. It looks like riparian corridors, flowering and leafing native plants lining naturally flowing creeks and streams. It looks like farmland that supports a multiplicity of edible native plants, not just one or two. It looks like open space parks that are protected wildland that flower abundantly in the spring and naturally dry with the coming of summer. The beautifully sculpted trails allow people to reconnect with this natural wonder and decompress from their daily lives. If you are local to the Bay Area, I encourage you to visit Coyote Valley and check out the work of the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority. If you are not local, I invite you to consider what land near you needs an advocate. What space do you walk or drive by regularly that allows you to breathe easier? Perhaps it is simply in your own backyard. We all have the opportunity to participate in restoration, even on the tiniest spot of land. The question at the end of the day is simple. How can we create a little more space for life? Whether that is joining forces with others to protect on a large scale, or simply creating space in our own homes for a little more life to become a part of our own.